Now let me turn very briefly to the issue of the judicial system and Brahmanism, because this is the background in which I wanted to speak about it. See, what is the judiciary? You know all this, but I'm just making an argument. I'm not saying it because you don't know, but I just want to construct an argument. The word judiciary and judge and justice comes from the root word J-U-S, use. J-U-S, use. Use means, you all know, the right norm, the right value of conduct, of human conduct. Sorry?
Which language?
In Latin. Use. So, I have taken, if you look at all definitions of justice, Rawls said justice is fairness, right? It is about how human beings treat each other. All theories of justice are about human conduct towards each other. So if this light falls on my head, unless there is a human intervention, there is no issue of law or justice. It is an electrical failure or something, suppose an insect ate something and it fell, the wire, or the mouse ate the wire and it fell. Then I can't go to court to sue the mouse. So justice, I argue, very simple thing, so sometimes difficult to comprehend because it's so simple. Justice is a standard of human conduct. Now the Indian judiciary and the Indian legal system is the only judiciary or legal system in the world whose mandate is defined in the Constitution itself. And no other branch of the Indian state has its mandate defined in the Constitution. That's in Article 39A. And it says that the state shall ensure that the operation of the legal system promotes justice on the basis of equal opportunity. So promote justice is the mandate of the judiciary and the legal system. Justice is a standard of human conduct, the right standard of human conduct. The standard of right human conduct, not wrong human conduct. That is justice. So the mandate of the judiciary is to promote the right standard of human conduct, the standard of right human conduct, correct human conduct. And punishment, conviction are instruments for that. Law is a set of rules that will promote the right standard of human conduct. So if I tell a child, be good, then I say, don't hit somebody, don't use bad language. These are rules. That's like law. Be a good child is a standard of human conduct. That is justice. So in this context, the role of the judiciary is very clear. Promote human conduct that is correct and use the instruments given to you of basically civil liabilities. So if you take the Indian Evidence Act, it says very beautifully, it says, and once I'm talking about the Indian Evidence Act, I'll just briefly make a detour to talk about materialism there. It very beautifully says it is to establish the existence, non-existence, nature or extent of right, liability or disability. Why do you give a right or impose liability or disability? To promote the right conduct amongst human beings through that. Now the question is, if this is the job of the judiciary, what is the definition of right human conduct? Who defines it? So in the ancient Brahminical state, so I say legally speaking, there are three phases in the Indian judicial system. The Raja era, the Raj era and the Swaraj era. Raja era is Brahminical rule. Raj era is the British rule. Swaraj era is constitutional rule. So the role of the judge in the Raja era was Dushta Dand Sajana Puja Rajya Kosha Vriddhi Rajya Raksha. Dushta Dand, Sajjana Raksha, Kosha Vriddhi, Rajya Raksha. Nothing to do about promoting the right standard of conduct. Why? Because the right standard of conduct was what they decided was the right standard of conduct. So Dushta, who is the Dushta and who is the Sajjan? Whoever does not follow their standard of conduct. What is the most important power of democracy? Democracy comes from the word kratos. Kratos means authority. Demos means common people. Kratos, power and authority, is in the hands of demos, common people. That is democracy. Sorry?
That's Greek. Greek.
Yeah, that's Greek. Yeah. Now, the most important part of democracy is that common people will decide what is right conduct and what is wrong conduct. Not the Brahmins, but the Dalits. When the Brahmins had the power to decide what was, the Brahmanism had the power to decide what was right conduct and wrong conduct. What was wrong conduct? For a Dalit to not maintain distance from the Brahmin, to let his shadow fall on the Brahmin. And of course, to rob or injure an upper caste is unthinkable. We should not let the new generation forget about the realities of the Chaturvarnya system, which is never talked about. Why is it that the Jewish people constantly remind the world about what happened in Germany? The Holocaust of the Jews. The Holocaust of the Avarnas shall not be forgotten. If a Ram temple is built in Ayodhya, there must be a memorial to the victims of casteism for generations in that Ram temple. So when they could decide what is right conduct and wrong conduct, we know. I don't have to tell you what was defined as right conduct and wrong conduct. But democracy now took that power away from them and put it in the hands of the poorest Dalit and said, you will define what is right conduct and wrong conduct. And a Dalit was a chairman of the drafting committee, and he said, what is wrong conduct? To take away somebody's equality, to take away somebody's freedom, to take away somebody's dignity. That is wrong conduct. That idea of a wrong conduct of justice will never come from a Brahminist judiciary. It has never come. We've had a Brahminist judiciary for centuries. Never produced it. But this constitution has changed that. One thing we tend to forget is there is no automatic, axiomatic relationship between a constitution and democracy and freedom, or independence of judiciary and democracy and freedom, or equality. There are many countries in the world which has constitution and constitutionalism. Constitutionalism is simply the idea that all governance shall be conducted in accordance with a constitution. But that constitution can prescribe the authoritarian dictatorship and can be used as a basis to take away equality and freedom. Similarly, independent judiciary. We had an independent judiciary when the British were ruling us. So what is crucial, what gives us our democracy, our freedom, our equality, is the ideological content of the constitution. If that ideological content is changed, we will have no democracy, no freedom, no equality. Constitution will still be there. So today, I'm half an hour, I'll stop in 5-7 minutes and then we'll have a discussion. Today the main attempt is two sets of ideologies are attacking the ideological content of the constitution to hollow out the constitution but keep it there. So it is not enough for us to say, let us defend the Constitution. We have to say, let us defend the ideology of the Constitution. And we must become acquainted very closely with the ideology of that Constitution. Reservations, equality, freedom, liberty, social welfare, a welfare state, socialism, secularism. One of the most important, this is where I said I'll make a small detour, beautiful definitions of secularism is the definition of fact in the Indian Evidence Act. Very powerful definition of fact. It says only that is a fact which based on proved fact, which on the basis of material placed before a court believes it to be true, which is capable, a fact is only a fact which is capable of being perceived by the senses or the consciousness of a person. That definition of the Evidence Act says that nothing that cannot be perceived by the senses exists. Which means basically, from the legal perspective, God does not exist. So on what basis can a truly modern court deal with the myths, the religious myths? They cannot. So the Evidence Act and modernity is dictating, this is secularism, that nothing but what can be perceived by senses shall be taken into account as a fact by the Indian state, as a basis of imposing right, liability or disability. So this framework, this ideology has to be, the fine print of this ideology has to be protected, and not one part of it can be allowed to be altered or changed. Then we will protect the soul of the Constitution, not just the formality of a Constitution, which can easily be hollowed out. So one attack is by the Hindu Rashtra idea, which is opposed to democracy, opposed to, if you read as Mr. Punyani knows very well, you read more better than me, the writings of Golwalkar or Savarkar, they explicitly say monarchy is better than democracy, equality is wrong, democracy is wrong, freedom is wrong, all these things are wrong. So that ideology wants to overthrow the ideological content of the Constitution even while keeping it there and destroy this republic. The second is neoliberalism. Neoliberalism wants to, the Hindu Rashtra concept wants to destroy the social ideology of the Constitution. Neoliberal and the political ideology of the Constitution, of democracy. Neoliberalism wants to destroy the economic ideology of the Constitution, which is socialism and a welfare state. And these two have common ground. They're coming together to hollow out the Constitution and destroy this republic. Now here, and this is the last point I want to make, the second last point I want to make, is where we have to recognize the truth that has been recognized all over the world, but we still pretend that it is not the truth. The truth is that judges have their own political ideology as human beings. That's why we are seeing in the United States is the only country that fully recognizes it. We are having this week, as we are going on, a nomination of a new judge to the Supreme Court, one of 9 judges. And what is being debated is the ideology of this man and his personal conduct, but both. So we all know that consciously or subconsciously, not always consciously, there is an ideology. Now I do agree that a judge normally should not be, and my own experience working with a large number of judges is that consciously most of them are not casteist. They are not, as individuals, they are not partisan in terms of wanting to support X party or Y party. They are very conscious of the fact that they are judges, and they must have decisional independence and neutrality. But what they don't realize is they're not capable of that as human beings. Our psychology and our biology prevent us from being independent. So I've had, I don't want to name him, one of the very distinguished judges in this country, now retired, once tell me, when I put on a gown, I'm not Mr. So-and-so, I'm a judge. I told him, I said, the gown may change the way you look, but it does not change who you are. Now let us take the best intentioned people, not the worst intentioned people. They cannot overcome their bias. They may be a good bias, they may be a bad bias. I have my bias. All of us have our ideology and our bias. So how do we respond to that? We respond to that in two ways. One is by building a very detailed methodology of how to judge and how judges should decide, which we have not yet done in this country, but we are trying to do now. So that the methodology becomes very clear, so that like a scientist, much more than now happens, there's less subjectivity, less arbitrariness, and a methodology of evaluating evidence, of analysis, the reasoning, the transparency of reasoning, of logic, the concepts of logic, reasoning, facts, the definition of fact I told you. All this should be combined to produce a counter to the prejudice and bias, human prejudice and bias that judges have. But beyond a point, there's a very famous American judge called Cardozo who actually said this. He said, judges cannot escape the tides that affect all human beings. So then what do? In addition to the methodology, we must make sure that the judiciary is fully representative of this country. And people from ordinary, common, non-privileged backgrounds should be in the Supreme Court, in the High Courts, in all the judiciary of the country. People who are working with their own hands, who know the actual realities. In fact, I thought of you, Professor Kancha, very happy to see, I think it was Maharashtra, retired judge. He went back and instead of taking a fancy post-retirement government job, he went back to being a farmer. So he's sitting with his lungi and his turban and all that on his tractor, and he's farming. And they put a picture of that. So he's done what you're saying. He's gone back to producing agricultural production. So people like that, and there are people like that, but we need more people like that who are representative of the common experience of people in this country, which means we must demand, we have reservations in the subordinate courts in some states in our country. We must have that in all states, and we must also have representation of women and representation of all castes and communities in the judiciary, which is today largely male upper caste Hindu, and therefore has a certain bias. Now the implication of this is also important, because if these two ideologies want to alter the ideology of the Constitution, they cannot do it through amendment of the Constitution or repealing and reenacting the Constitution. There will be massive resistance in this country. So the only way they can do it is through interpretation of the Constitution by courts. And that's how they're doing it. We saw that with the SC/ST Atrocities Act. Justice Chinnappa Reddy of Andhra Pradesh, a great judge, he wrote a book called Summit and Shallows of the Constitution before he passed away. And in that book he has called the 50% limit on reservations as unconstitutional. Right? So they put 50% reservation limit. They're altering the Constitution, and you need only 5 or 6 people to alter the ideology of the Constitution. And this, the whole idea of limiting the power of Parliament to alter the Constitution, these are all ideas that have come from the judiciary. So we need to ensure that we must democratize the judiciary and the judicial system, and make it representative of the people and the masses of this country. And we must also, as I said at the beginning, reject the false idea, the false belief that judges don't have at the level of ideology, not at the level of prejudice, neutrality. They don't, which means we must have judges who are committed not to party, not to individuals, not to particular partisan interests, but to the ideology of the Constitution. After all, they take an oath in which they say they have faith in the Constitution. Faith in the Constitution means what? Faith in the ideology of the Constitution. So we have to examine every candidate who is appointed to the judiciary. If they are against reservations, they should never be made a judge of any court in this country, because reservation is a part of the Constitution of India. We cannot have a judge who will sit there and say, rule against reservation. His job is to protect and fight and strengthen reservation, not to destroy it. So we must rethink the way the judges are appointed. There was a recent book written by, again, people who don't share the same ideology, but I was asked to review it for EPW. I've just written the review, it will come, where I've said this, that the ideology of the judges must be taken into account, otherwise we will lose our Constitution through judicial interpretation.